Morning. I hope everyone had a lovely evening last night and are ready for a lively discussion today. I'm just going to have my panelists, if y'all wouldn't mind just filing out, and then I'll let y'all introduce yourselves. So if y'all want to come out right after me, we're going to have a great discussion today with some heavy hitters in the industry, probably some of the heaviest hitters in the industry. And we're gonna talk a little bit about how we can, in fact, innovate fast enough. So we'll talk a little bit about all the technologies that are coming to the market right now, and get into a lively discussion about what needs to be done and how all of these guys are going to do it, in fact. So I'm going to let y'all just start off by introducing yourselves to the audience and talk a little bit about who you are, what you do, where you're doing it for, and then we'll get into the discussion. So I believe y'all have lapel mics, so Rod, if you wouldn't mind.
All right, my name is Rod West. Good morning, everyone. I'm Executive Vice President and CAO of Entergy Corporation. We're headquartered in New Orleans, Louisiana. Our utilities cover the states of Louisiana, Arkansas, Mississippi, and parts of Texas, essentially eastern part of Texas, east of Houston. We're excited to be here. We also have a merchant power business, primarily consisting of nuclear assets in the northeast United States, predominantly about 30,000 megawatts of generating capacity. We serve about 2.8 million customers in the southern Gulf states.
Gil?
Good morning, my name is Gil Quiniones. I'm the president and CEO of the New York Power Authority. Good morning, y'all. Did I get that right?
That almost sounded natural.
I got
almost
that
natural.
right. So we are the largest state-owned public power utility in the United States. I am also here wearing a second hat. I am the chairman of the board of the Electric Power Research Institute, which is the R&D arm of the electric utilities around the world. And excited to be here, excited to share with you what's going on in New York.
Hi, good morning. Welcome to Texas. I'm John Hewa, the CEO of Panelist Electric Cooperative. We are the nation's largest electric distribution cooperative, headquartered in Johnson City, Texas, just to our immediate west here. And we serve an 8,100 square mile territory west of Austin and approaching the northwest of San Antonio throughout a region known as the Texas Hill Country. Very glad to be here. We're one of 900 electric co-ops across the United States of America. Co-ops cover about 70% of the landmass. Very interesting things happening in the co-op world, very interesting things happening at Panelist, and I'm glad to be able to share that with you today. A little bit about the co-op. We're a very fast-growing organization at the present time, seeing a lot of suburban and commercial growth throughout our territory. We're rapidly working to implement some renewable programs and to improve our partnership with our members, our member owners. Thank you.
Hello, everyone. I'm Rodger Smith. I run the global utilities business for Oracle. We serve across the entire value chain of utilities, everywhere from an electric generation, from the generating side of the business through T&D, all the way back into the customer. We do water utilities as well as gas utilities. We've got the largest portfolio of solutions across the value chain of anybody out there, and I hope we have a good time today talking about innovation in this industry, which is going through significant change.
And last but certainly not least.
Yeah, hello everyone, is that working?
Yeah, it's
Yeah.
I'm Ian McLeod from Queensland, Australia. My current role is Chairman of Queensland Futures Institute Committee. Probably more relevant though, I was CEO of Ergon Energy Corporation, which is the Queensland regional distributor, covers 97% of Queensland. Big area, 160,000 kilometres of line. Deputy Chairman of the Energy Supply Association of Australia and Director of ENA, Energy Networks Australia. Challenging or relevance, I guess, in terms of Queensland, that may be an interesting fact for people here, is it's got the highest penetration of renewable rooftop solar in the world at this present moment. So that's certainly been a challenge for us and probably relevant to the discussion today.
Before we jump into the discussion, I have a little bit of housekeeping. I don't know if y'all saw me talk yesterday, and if you did, I'm sorry. And if you didn't, lucky you. But unfortunately, y'all are stuck with me. However, to make this more interactive and more collaborative, I am following Twitter at the hashtag ETS16 hashtag. and also my personal Twitter account. So if y'all want to tweet questions at me, because y'all are the experts here, and I'm sure y'all have incredible questions to pose to the panelists, I will be happy to pose them should you holler at me. So feel free to do that if you enjoy using technology and the innovation that we're going to be talking about today. So I think the first question really, and Rodger, I'm going to direct this to you since you're the tech guy. How are new technologies changing the energy industry right now? What do you see as, and then I'll open it to the panel, but Rodger, you first. What do you see as sort of the ways, the technologies that are impacting things and how they're doing it?
Yeah, I think there's two major areas in utilities today that are going to be affected by innovation. And by the way, most of this impact is yet to come. We still run this industry fairly traditionally around the globe, but I think we haven't seen the largest impacts yet. But innovation and new technology is really going to impact two areas, in my view, very substantially. One is the customer side of the business for utilities. Customers, as we have learned around the globe, are beginning to expect the same thing from the utilities that they get from other businesses they interface with. And what we're seeing is on the customer side is more demand for individual treatment, more real-time communication, more customization in terms of how I'm treated based on how I use the product, whether it's electricity, water, or gas. I want my bill to be different. I want my services to be different. If I have outage issues, I want to know immediately. I want to know why. I want to know where it'll come back on. So the technology around how the utility interfaces with its customer, everything from smart meters to new billing systems to edge-of-the-grid technology is going to be huge. And again, we're just now at the very tip of that iceberg. That innovation is yet to come. A lot of the technology is there, but how quickly it gets adopted is another question. And that'll differentiate itself actually around the world. The other area we're seeing huge change is actually in how utilities operate their systems. The fact that the grid is changing dramatically. You know, in the old days, you thought if you had an EMS system and a SCADA system in the electric business, you had everything you needed to operate your utility. That's the old way of thinking. The new way is really going to be around how do I operate at the edge of the grid with real-time scenarios. The data question is one question, but we're going to need to manage the edge of the grid real time with PV coming in and electric vehicles and all different types of resources that customers are going to have to be able to plug and play into that grid. The technology advancements there are fast and furious. The biggest challenge is probably the way that utilities are going to be able to adopt those and how quickly they'll be able to adopt those. But those two areas, I think, will see the biggest technology impact the quickest, and that'll have the biggest impact on how utilities operate and interface with their customers.
And so, my utility panelists, like, what do you see as your role in all of this? How are you looking at the coming wave of technology innovation, and what are y'all doing to sort of accommodate it right now? So, Rod, if you want to take that, and we'll just move down the line.
Sure. I think the point, starting the conversation first with the customers, is the right place, because technology and certainly utilities deploying technology for technology's sake is really an effort in futility if we're not meeting the expectations of those customers. There's a coolness about evolution and innovation of technology. But what we know at the end of the day is that our customers demand a level of service that they can afford to pay for. And so as we think about how to deploy technology, either to meet what is a growing diversity of customer demand, we still have the responsibility to do so prudently, both from an operational perspective with our respective systems. But we serve customers. And that's the challenge, particularly for us in a regulated space as we are in the southern states, is striking that balance between innovation and affordability and utility in the traditional sense.
And in New York, we are probably in the middle of this transformation under what we're calling the reforming the energy vision. So one area where innovation is happening in New York is in the regulatory compact. How do we incentivize utilities to invest in distributed energy resources and help foster distributed energy resources and cleaner sources of energy away from the traditional model of just investing capital and getting a return on that invested capital. So we're in the throes of that regulatory change. terms of innovation, I like to make predictions, so I'll make a few predictions here. I believe that, one, all new home appliances in 2020 will be internet enabled. I believe that battery storage density, if you look at the past 25 years, it increased by about 3.5x. It will probably 10x over the next 25 years, so your laptop running on 4 hours will run on 40 hours. We're seeing already the electric vehicle. There's about 350,000, 400,000 now over the past 5 years. Over the next 3 years, there will be about 25 electric vehicles, plug-in electric vehicles that are going to be launched. And the range, driving range is increasing from the original Chevy Volt at 80 miles to now 200 miles with the Chevy Bolt with a B. So in general, my take is that the pace and extent of innovation will increase probably between 3x to 5x over the next 25 years. So the innovation that we experience over the past 25 years, we will see an experience over the next 5 to 8 years. That's my take on how big the transformation is.
Thank you, Jonathan. Rodger mentioned two areas of, he really talked about the enterprise level platforms as well as the consumer level impact of new technologies. And I think what I can bring to the conversation today is an understanding of the electric co-op model and how both of those are highly relevant. First, co-ops are rather small. We're the largest of the distribution co-ops, but we're very small, relatively small compared to the investor-owned utilities, for instance. We have much lower service densities, much lower consumer count per mile of line. On average, electric co-ops are about 7 accounts per mile, again, over 70% of the nation's land mass. We've got higher maintenance costs per mile, lower revenue per mile. You're getting the picture here. We've got the exposure of a lot of challenges, suburban areas that are rapidly building up, and rural areas that are exposed to a lot of storm and other types of exposure have higher line loss. So when you look at what's happening from a technological standpoint, first and foremost, for a smaller organization on average, the technology that's happening in terms of the back office and the enterprise platforms are phenomenal for us. They're doing great things for us in terms of lowering cost and bringing in efficiencies. They pencil out very, very well in the electric co-op space as we're able to reduce truck rolls. We're able to utilize data more efficiently. At Panelist Electric, we have just recently replaced our entire enterprise software system with a completely mobile application, new member web self-service environment that helps us continue to provide the personal touch, but also allows our members to move and work more rapidly with us. On top of that, we've done a complete device connectivity, photographing and building a new GIS platform for our entire network so that the next wave of this will deliver very, very rapid, very, very accurate, real-time outage data in a very precise way. We're beyond the days of, we're working on it, we'll get the lights back on, but how do we get to a very, very specific conversation? So on the back office enterprise side, we are quickly moving in those areas. We've implemented new systems, and they're performing quite well and helping us lower costs. On the consumer side, the electric co-op model is perfectly aligned. We are nonprofit organizations. We are owned by our members. Our members are our consumers, and they own the utility. We solely exist for the purpose of serving our membership. So when we look at distributed energy resources, somewhat indifferent as to where the electrons originate from, we're very glad, very excited about transactions across the grid. Obviously, we depend heavily on central station service. We all need to find that right balance of dispatchable, dependable, along with new distributed resources that may be less dispatchable or intermittent. But we're doing a lot in the area of deepening the partnership. We think that the model that we have as a business aligns perfectly. One example of that, we've just launched very recently Empower loans for energy storage and solar. And so we can maybe talk more about it in a minute, but we're basically providing on-bill financing. We're working to get access to low-interest federal loans to make those available to our consumers. And I want to make sure that we're one of the organizations that in a non-subsidized way is helping aid in the partnership with our member owners. We're optimizing the assets that they've already invested in. And we're doing that in a way that we're partnering with local installers so that our members get the best of utility scale and service, what the grid can do to support those resources, and our way of bringing down the life cycle cost through on-bill financing.
Ian, what have you seen in terms of the way that your utility system has responded to all of these innovations that are happening? What's going on in Australia?
Yeah, look, I think from an innovation IT perspective and from a data perspective, we've seen a lot of transformation occurring in the industry. It is all about the customer at the end of the day. Everything's about the customer. It's a value proposition for them. Affordability's been a big issue for our customers in Australia. The prices have been going up over a short period of time. Customers are looking to substitute their energy from other sources, from solar PVs. There's batteries going in there as well. So it's about us enabling a value proposition for a customer. Our proposition is they want to be pretty well passive in a lot of these decisions. They want to make these decisions early up front. I want my electricity bill to stay down. I want it to be lower than it is now. I want higher levels of reliability. I want some value added around security. I want to be able to charge my car. I want to be able to feed into the grid. But they don't. We're all busy. We don't want to be worried about what we're doing there. So we're seeing the integration of obviously smart tariffs with smart meters, and people can start to manage customers' bills to a single lump sum that's guaranteed every month. Why can you do that? Because you can now hedge and control the loads that are flowing through, because you can control a battery or a PV or a pool pump or something like that. But the customers don't want to see that. I think the other connection is in Ergon, we created a technology around spatial intelligence. So we capture our whole asset every year, 160,000 kilometres of it in a 3D virtual world. What does that allow us to do? It allows us to reduce our vegetation costs, our operating costs, and when it comes to customer service, a big mine connects, we can pretty much do that in the back office on the desktop. So enabling your customers, creating value for your customers, have a proposition there. Yeah. It enables you to simplify their lives, right, not make it more complicated.
Well, and so John mentioned some of the incentives that are going on in Panelist. Like, how did you manage to, or what sort of incentives were put in place to drive that solar adoption, that amazing solar adoption that y'all have in Queensland?
Well, it is an amazing solar adoption, so you'd think the incentives were quite good. So, and they were. It was state-based. Kevin Rudd at the time in 2008 came out with an agenda to bring in emission trading schemes. The states fell behind that sort of push. The federal government's had a 5 times multiple on what's called a renewable energy certificate, which was the certificate for a tonne of carbon. So that reduced the upfront capital costs. And then I think the states have a competition on how much they could pay in terms of a feed-in tariff. And can I say, on the gross feed-in tariff, New South Wales won with a 60 cents gross for all energy produced. In Queensland, where I'm from, it was a 44-cent feed-in tariff. So just to give you a comparison, the delivered cost of energy, secure energy, reliable energy from the grid at that stage was around 20 cents. It was costing us about 3 cents to buy the energy from a centralised power station. So 44 cents was a significant feed-in tariff, and it was contracted to 2028. So it was 20 years when it was first brought in. We phased that out, the government phased that out in 2012, and it's now 6.5 cents. Wow. But the interesting thing is we haven't seen the curve change much. It went up rapidly. We went from 44 cents to 6.5 cents. Everyone got very upset about that on the other side, but we haven't really seen the take-up come off.
Right. And so, Gil, New York has set some really aggressive targets recently under Cuomo. When you think about where y'all are in the cycle, and you said you're sort of midway through it or in the early stages of this push, what's been most successful? What's been the most challenging thing about meeting those targets that the governor set and that the state set for renewables?
It's surprising that solar penetration is actually very high in New York. It increased about 300, 400% over the last 3-4 years. You wouldn't think, it's not Australia in terms of sun quality, but that's been good. One of the efforts that my company is doing specifically is we're putting solar panels in all of the public schools across the state. There are about 5,000 public schools, and we're about 1,000 schools into doing that. And we believe that that's the best way to transform the market, by immersing our future leaders in renewable energy. The most challenging part is to figure out a business model where utilities can have new streams of revenue and sources of returns. And so there are pilots being done across the state to figure that out, so that, again, we can incentivize them to, rather than putting money into copper and equipment and get that return there, get a return and incentive by providing new value-added services on the customer side. With that said, it needs to be an integrated grid. There has to be a central generation and transmission system that works in harmony and synchronicity with the distribution and the grid edge. And a lot of the research that the Electric Power Research Institute is doing is around that. How do you maximize and optimize the value of the central generation system as you decarbonize that part with the distribution and the grid edge?
Rod, how is Entergy dealing with that tension between sort of the centralized generation and the distributed power? Is that not so much of an issue for y'all's
No,
customers?
it's very much an issue, but again, it goes back to the premise we started from. It's a customer-centric conversation, not in the short term, but over the long haul. One of the great advantages of sort of subsidies in introducing new technology into the marketplace is that it aids in adoption and certainly aids in R&D. The downside of subsidy over the long term is that it hides the true cost of production or service to the customer. Where our state-by-state battle is striking that balance with the near-term adoption by those who can afford to pay, balanced against, for instance, the regressive effects of spreading the rest of the cost over the remaining customer class for those who do not. But I think whether it's Texas, Louisiana, Arkansas, Mississippi, we certainly pay very much attention to what Gil and the team does in New York. We're constantly asking ourselves, what's the right pace of adoption and also tracking sort of the development of PV technology.
John,
Jonathan, I just got to jump in because I kind of heard the term incentive and subsidy and then mandate. And I want to be clear what we're doing at the co-op. I mean, again, member-owned co-op, we're here to serve our members. What we're doing is not out of mandate, and we're not mandated to provide support to our members in terms of renewable systems or storage systems, and we're not doing it out of subsidy. We built a plan, having monitored some of the rebate programs, if you will, around the country and some of the issues that had come up with those. We wanted to build a very utility, pragmatic approach. And I think we're just in the early stages of that. We've just gone live with the program, but I think we've done that because what we can bring to the table is convenience and low-cost interest. We're putting a nominal markup on that. And if you, ironically, from a distribution wires company, if you look at the delivery charge and our annual margin on the basis of a delivery charge, it doesn't take much interest spread to actually equate to, if not surpass, the would-have-been revenue from the energy units that aren't delivered. So we think we've got an approach that is workable. It is non-subsidy. We're a very anti-subsidy environment, but it is very pro-member, owner, consumer in the ability to do what we think we can do well in that partnership.
Well, so Rodger, I'd like just one thing. I think there's a third leg to the stool that y'all aren't addressing, which are the operational efficiencies that can be wrung out of your own systems through technology, right? And I'm hoping, Rodger, that maybe you can speak to some of that. There are ways in which y'all can actually deploy technologies to make your systems more efficient, so it costs less for you to provide that power and those services to those customers. And is that something that well, first, Rodger, why don't you talk a little bit about some of the things folks can do, and then we'll talk a little bit about.
So I think it's interesting globally, and that is, let me just make a macroeconomic observation. It's pretty obvious to most of us in this business, but since 2008, when we saw the financial collapse, it doesn't matter what type of utility you are, or which one of the vertical utility industries you serve, there was a decline in revenue. And whether you're a co-op or whether you're an IOU or whether you're in China or the US or someplace in Europe, it really doesn't matter. We saw revenues really really declined, and then revenues have kind of come up to where they're essentially flat. There's very little growth on the revenue line of this business. And so what we've noticed globally is utilities, and again, doesn't matter size, doesn't matter type, utilities are looking for ways to reduce operating costs because they have to do more, frankly, with less. And I think technology is really the fundamental play there in terms of how do you keep doing the same thing you've always done and yet reduce cost. And the answer is you can't. You can't do that. You have to do things differently than you did in the past with a constrained revenue stream. And the idea is technology does do that. And we, frankly, with our folks that we sell to, it's a business case question now. Everything has to have a return on investment. Gil and I were talking about this in the old days of smart meters, utilities. I think I read almost in North America every case that was filed with a commission where we argued that smart meters were there for the benefit of the customer. We found out, in fact, that's not true. Right. The biggest benefit to the smart meter has been how utilities can actually optimize the performance of the distribution system, and even back further than that, optimize how they purchase power or generate power, to the extent where you can actually reduce it by a great amount to defer generation, defer contracting for power, however you apply it. So technology has been the key to actually being able to do more with less. The business cases are there. And it does impact all pieces of the business. Rod mentioned, he was talking about the customer. We think that there are business cases that indicate that if you apply the right technologies, you will actually substantially reduce the cost of serving those customers. Let me just give you a small example. Most IT shops across the globe within utilities spend about 70 to 75% of their budgeted monies just doing regular maintenance on their systems. There's been a real collapse of IT and OT across this industry. So now when I say IT, that those folks actually maintain most of the systems in the utility. 70 to 75% of that dollar spent is just in routine maintenance of those systems. One of the things that the industry is finally recognizing, and we just published a new survey, we will be publishing it here shortly, says that utilities are recognizing that there's a benefit to perhaps having other people worry about the maintenance of those systems and the updating of those systems, and can see 20 to 30% reduction in their overall cost by doing that just in their IT side of the business, and allowing companies like ours to worry about that, and they go worry about innovation, better ways to serve customers, et cetera. So I think what we're seeing is technology does in fact reduce operating costs because of the impacts of things like smart meters, and if you know how to look at the data, there's a business case there. It definitely helps with customer satisfaction. Most utilities have scorecards for customer sat, so there's a benefit there. It definitely helps with how you use the big data and use it to get operational efficiencies in how you service equipment and other things, so there's a cost impact there. So across the board, the business cases are becoming pretty clear that technology is a way for you to be able to take the same dollars you've had and do more with them.
Well, so Gil, one second, but Ian, I wanted to get your thought on the end there. So you had mentioned some of the initiatives that y'all had adopted in Queensland around. I think you talking about drones and some of the other stuff that y'all had been doing. How did that not only affect sort of service and optimization of the types of services that y'all were delivering to customers, but also cost? I would assume that there's a cost reduction to that as well, right?
Absolutely. So we had a big problem. So and it's all about matching technologies to a problem. Our network was more reliable. We were getting our minutes and stadium safety down, but what I wasn't seeing was the cost going down in terms of vegetation. While my inspectors would inspect the poles, I could see the assets, I could see the transformers, I couldn't see the environment. So we created a technology called ROAMS, which was an aggregation of a flight platform, flight assist, flight planning, twin lidars, imagery, algorithms that sit behind it, massive computer processing speed, and we create a 3D virtual world of our whole asset, 160,000 kilometres every year. So I can see the distance from a conductor to the ground, the conductor to conductor, conductor to building, conductor to vegetation, and it's automated. It creates a work order at the back end. We put in our business rules, says the trees have got to be out this clearance, plane flies over, a work order comes out the other end. Our vegetation costs went from 106 million down to 60 million.
Wow.
Per annum not just because of rains, but because of some contract management strategies as well. Our disaster planning times, our disaster response times went down, so we use it for disaster response. We can see where the conductors are down, the trees are down. When we have what's called a cyclone, you have a hurricane, hits northern Queensland. Our customer service times improved because we can plan in the back office. And we've now gone to resilience planning and I got Rod to come over to Australia last year to help us in this space. We're doing that from a planning resilience perspective. So I can model a cyclone coming into any of the regional towns in Queensland, because we have every one of them mapped now, and look at the resiliency of the community infrastructure and ours. So it's improved customer service, it's reduced risk. 30,000 spans we had under clearance once we turned it on, and we used humans to inspect those before, but they make mistakes. And when we turned it on, we had 30,000 spans at risk. So a big issue for me was safety. Big issue for me was safety. It's a safer network. We're managing the risk better. We've reduced the cost, and we've improved customer service.
And Gil and Rod, I'll let y'all speak to that.
Just to follow up with the question about capacity utilization and system efficiency of utilities, there's no choice. Utilities have to increase its system efficiency and capacity utilization. In New York, for example, it's probably typical for many utilities. The system efficiency of the power grid is 54%. Capacity utilization is designed for the 2 weeks in July, the hottest of the hottest days in July. Most of the time, the system is not used. So we need to innovate across the chain, from generation, transmission, but especially at the edge of the grid. We need to make demand more flexible. We need to make demand more productive and efficient. That's the only way we can increase system efficiency and address the issues that Rod is talking about in terms of affordability. Because in the long run, if you're in the private business, in the process industry or manufacturing business, you're not going to survive at 54% capacity utilization. So that, I think, is where we're headed. The utilities have to reinvent themselves and do innovation while maintaining affordability.
So one of the things that we talked about yesterday was sort of the Internet of Things, right? And the customer adoption of the Internet of Things. And
we call it the grid of things.
Well, we'll deal with that in a second. But I want to ask you, how do y'all see being able to use the fact that all of these devices, you mentioned that dishwashers will be connected, pretty much every device in the home is going to be connected to the web in some way, shape, form, or fashion. How are y'all looking to sort of cull that data and use that to optimize your own delivery of services to customers? How deeply do you think customers are willing to let you go into their homes to sort of control or manage that or even harvest that data? Do y'all have any sense of, Rod, I'll start with you and then go down the line.
That's the long-term question for us, and I'd be curious as to if there's anybody on this panel or candidly anyone in the office that has a clear vision about that. I know that our friends at Google and some of the others have a point of view. Certainly Elon Musk has a point of view around who ought to own that space. I think about this fact. Our customers across the board spend, let's say, 1% to 3% of their income on the actual flow of electrons to their homes, businesses or what have you. But they spend more than a third of that income on the stuff that uses it, that creates value in their lives. And the question for us is how do we continue to create value, not just in the general flow of electrons where the customers view it as a commodity that they don't really think about. Right. How do we remain relevant in that value chain? And so the smart devices are doing nothing more than changing customer expectations around the relationship between themselves and that source, the source and use of power. And that's really the debate we're talking about. It's not a new technology in terms of how you generate electricity. Right. It's how that electricity is used to create value for the end user.
Well, and also I think on the flip side of that is that you have users who want to generate their own power and sort of taking away that side of your business from you, and how you address that is sort of an issue as well. But getting back to sort of big data and the role that plays in optimization and the services that y'all provide.
Well, there's a lot of demonstrations going on right now in New York. Rod mentioned about Google, Nest and battery storage companies, for example, in Con Edison in New York City, where Con Ed is deploying a lot of this devices and controlling. It has to be simple. Comfort, convenience, simple. That has to be a requirement. But we'll see. We'll see how that works out. My company, the New York Power Authority, we're putting smart meters and sensors and connecting the building management system of about 5,000 government buildings across New York State, bringing it in a knock and helping to optimize their energy use while also interacting with the distribution control centers of utilities in times of need, if there are grid efficiencies that they could do that. So it's all getting tested now. We'll see where the value will be created, and I think that's going to sort itself out.
John, what are you finding from your customers, your members?
Sure. I think there'll be, any number of utilities that'll go deeply into that space, and others will just simply be bystanders. But I think we have an obligation, and not just an obligation, I think it's the right thing to do, first and foremost, to get our rate signals appropriately and equitably aligned to the market and the realities of how we buy and sell electricity. And so here in the state of Texas, energy-only market, our transmission costs have literally gone up. Not our cost, but our rate has gone up 90% in about the last 7 years. 90, not 9, 90%. And so 10% of our annual revenue, or our annual cost, is attributed to our performance for 15 minutes in June, 15 minutes in July, 15 minutes in August, and 15 minutes in September. So a residential or commercial consumer, their demand on the grid at those 4 moments in time will define about 10% of our annual expense in terms of transmission costs. Each market is different, but there's an obligation, and again, it's the right thing to do for the utility to establish rates that are beyond maybe the traditional in terms of providing a better signal for those members or those consumers that elect voluntarily to opt into those programs. And so for those that are adopting those technologies and utilizing the information, the data, they may be able to see a literal reduction in their cost of energy.
And Rodger, y'all are sitting at a very good place to sort of address these tensions between sort of the consumer data that's coming off of devices like Nest, all of these consumer devices, and the software and services that y'all are providing to the industry as a whole. What does that relationship look like between, say, you and Google in terms of getting that data, making that manageable, getting that in a format that folks can actually use?
Yeah, and well, let me back up and just say this is an area where I think, and I say this with love in my heart to my utility brethren up here. I was 16 years at Southern Company, so just know that. But this is where this industry is really missing it. I mean, we are really missing an opportunity here to grab on to customers like we've never done it before. And let me just give you some examples. First of all, when we talk about smart meters, I always get a kick about that because, what's really important in a meter today, and a smart meter is probably no bigger than the size of my wallet, right? The reason we make smart meters look like they look today is because it makes the customer feel good. But the technology embedded in a smart meter that's important is about that size. We're not going to need meters. We don't need meters today because what you're going to have is, to the points made on the panel, is you're going to have sensors embedded in most places in a home or a business or industrial facility, sensors in every outlet, sensors in every appliance, sensors in every, and that data will be aggregated, and that data will be used to customize how you set your rate structure, so to speak, or your customer billing structure. And then the billing systems you have are going to be able to do that without the customer blinking an eye. To the point made earlier, customers don't want to have to sit there for the most part and do all that. Everybody's busy, and that will frankly be so complex they won't want to do it. But we'll be able to set up customized bills for every customer out there, depending on what that technology is telling us in terms of what appliances use the power, when did it use the power, time of day, all those types of things. it will be a much different world. Now, in my view, the utility is perfectly positioned to capture that, to be the entity that pulls all those components together. And right now, there's too many utilities thinking about, well, maybe I should just do things up to the meter and forget it. If this industry misses that opportunity, it misses a huge potential for growth. The biggest growth potential in this business, in my view, is what's going to happen beyond the meter. And people think, well, does that mean we sell Nest thermostats? No, that's not a needle mover on revenue, okay? But all that data that's sitting there, who gets the data? When do they get the data? What do they use it for? The fact that I want to be in charge of how you put PV on your roof or how you're going to use your electric vehicle, and I want to be able to supply you the infrastructure to do that. The ability to attract the customer beyond the meter in that business, I think in this business is huge. And there's no other big way to grow revenue in this business as conservation is going to take further hold. Now, being able to manage that is a huge challenge. And that's the edge of the grid components we've talked about before. Customers want to have their own generation, maybe, maybe not. And in places like New York City, it's not very practical. In other places where it's more rural, it's going to be more practical. One size will not fit all. There are some constraints around that. The technology can be built. It's mostly there today. There's a few software things we have to get our heads around in terms of real-time management at the edge of the grid, but we're just about there. We've worked a lot with companies like San Diego to develop that technology, Zpryme and other places. That technology is there. It's not a technology, it's psychological issues that are holding this industry back, to be very honest about it. I heard a presentation where somebody said, well, technology is 10 years ahead of this industry, and this industry is 10 years ahead of its regulators. If we really believe that, this industry is in serious trouble. In my view, we have to collapse that down to real time. Right? I mean, there can't be a lag between technology and the rate of adoption at the utility, and there certainly can't be a lag in terms of the regulators. But there is right now, especially in North America and Europe, for example. And I would argue that right now, putting PV on a lot of customers' rooftops is disadvantageous to a lot of the customers who can't afford PV, because they're the ones whose distribution costs are going to go up to be able to allow other customers who can afford it to put PV on the rooftop. We need to change that regulatory paradigm to make that, to take care of issues like that. But from my perspective, the technology is there today to do those types of things, and this industry needs to take a big leap. Utilities need to take the lead in bringing together the regulators, the lawmakers, the financial institutions, organizations like EEI, Zpryme, to get together and come up with a solution around this lag of technology adoption and the regulator. It can be done, it needs to be done. And by the way, that's not a North America issue. You see the same thing in the UK. God bless the utility execs in the UK, because that is a tough regulatory environment. I mean, it really is. It may be the toughest in the world in terms of how it's run. But you see them struggling with the same issues in Asia. Japan's trying to figure out what this new environment looks like in terms of how they interface with the customers. So,
there's a tension there, right? Because the technology industry in a lot of cases has the luxury of going, whoops, my bad. In a lot of cases where crap gets really messed up. And power companies can't do that, which actually there are a lot of questions from the floor that have been flowing in, and I'm sorry I haven't been able to address them, but these guys have just been saying such smart stuff. I kind of didn't want to interrupt. But one of the questions that was...
Just let me say one thing. You can do that without violating the regulatory compact. It all has to be built around a business case. It can't be willy-nilly. Right?
Well, but I think the point I was trying to get to was the issue of security, right? And I mean, you have problems where banks get hacked or your Netflix account gets hacked or whatever, and people say, I'm really sorry, and they give you your money back or they do what they can. But these are critical. I mean, like, the energy grid is a critical piece of American infrastructure, and you can't mess around with that, right? I mean, so how much is there a tension between the rate of adoption of all of these new interconnected technologies and the sort of need to harden it to the point where it's not able to be attacked. It's sort of subject to that.
It's not a limitation to cyber. At the end of the day, what you're talking about is how do we manage risk.
Right.
We think about risk of cyber not differently than we think about the risk of storms and hurricanes and cyclones or disruptions to the grid, whether it's SIP requirements, whether it's NERC, whether we deal with sea level rise, hurricanes along the Gulf Coast. It's a conversation about how we manage risk. And so, You're alluding to the cyber conversation. I don't know if we have the time to go into that, but I can tell you from the boardrooms, our boards of directors on down, our regulators, we're all having those conversations day in and day out. And here's the challenge, and it's no different than what Rodger talks about in terms of technology. The moment you think you've arrived at a point of view, technology has evolved, the risk profile that you thought you were conquering has evolved or matured, or the bad actors have adjusted to your remedial plan to keep your system safe. So this is a constantly evolving conversation for us that we don't plant a flag in the ground and say we've arrived at a point where we feel safe. This will endure long before all of our respective careers.
All right. I'm going to do as sort of one second to last exercise. Hopefully we'll have time for one more question. But I'd like y'all to do a little bit of role playing for me for a second. And let's say that you are not a utility executive, but you are in fact a tech company or someone working in the technology industry.
I can do that.
Well, I mean, you're going to have to play the role of a utility, my friend.
Yeah.
So don't get too comfortable. But go down the list. What is the one thing that you would want to make or create that you would provide to a utility? What is the one thing that you think the utility companies are lacking that you would innovate or sell them that doesn't already exist or would optimize for? Rod?
I just spoke. I'll leave some time for my colleagues.
You want to think.
I'll start if you want.
Well, Ian, you want to take that?
Yeah, it's a little bit about what we've been talking about, but for me, it's that transactive energy platform.
But what does that? I mean, like, what does that mean?
Well, look, as Gil said before, he's running his asset at whatever it was, 40-something%. We're going to be running these assets hot in the future. There's a plan for Australia, North Australia, to double the population there. My view on that is you can do that with 25% investment, but you've got to be able to get control of those resources. And it gets back into the Internet of Things. You don't have to have control of everything. You have to have a control of enough to deal with those hot days. So what is transactive energy? We have it at the top level at the moment with the big baseload generators, a transmission system, and your operators. The reality is it's going to be in the low voltage grid, and the medium voltage grid in the future. So you're moving the energy around between PVs and battery storage and demand management and those sorts of things. You have to understand the tariffs that sit behind there, the commercial arrangements, what's my cheapest resource to switch. So you need a very intelligent system to be able to do that, a combination between IT, OT, commercial platforms, comms platforms, electrical platforms to create that transactive energy future. So once you've got that...
Yeah. So Rodger, you're now you're now a utility executive.
We should talk.
Yeah.
You're now a utility executive. What do you do from that standpoint? What is the most important technology to adopt, other than Oracle systems, of course, right?
Well, that's the best way to do it.
We can take you out on our boat.
Yeah, exactly. There you go. And I watch a lot of utility execs, and back to the point Rob was making earlier, I think, as a utility executive sitting there today, the cybersecurity threat is absolutely huge. And I got to tell you, I can tell you just about for a fact that, every utility system in this country currently gets pinged by people they don't quite understand who it is, where it is, or what it is. And I think that's a huge concern. I think the industry has done a really good job of trying to prevent the catastrophic event from happening, and led by folks like Tom Fanning and others who are deeply engaged, as most of these folks are, with folks in Washington. But I think one of the things that I would ask of somebody like me is what can you guys do to really help out? And I get asked that very little, by the way. I have more engineers in Oracle worried about cybersecurity than most utilities have engineers, period. And they will never solve the problem like I can help you solve the problem. Right. And yet nobody comes to us. Other industries do, but the utility industry doesn't, because we all think in the utility business we do it better than anybody else. All right.
And right? John,
yeah, I think there's an overarching fabric that needs to be brought in the conversation, and that's interoperability standards. Right. We talked about the extent to which utilities, and some utilities, may be behind technology, and the degree to which some regulators may be behind the utilities. Where we're really lacking, and if you look at the advancements in telecom and the advancements in computing, and you look at the power grid, we are lacking a generation of much tighter, and I don't mean power generation, I mean a time generation of much tighter interoperability, because the pieces simply are disparate in many cases. Now, IP layers are bringing a lot of that together, but there is a certain degree of interoperability that is lacking that is very relevant to cyber. It is very relevant to distributed energy resources. It is very relevant to minimizing or eliminating demarcation or hard demarcation points between the grid and the consumer, and grids within the home, and grids within the entity. So, the interoperability standards are moving at a more of a glacial pace than anything else. And so that's a big problem, because each of the vendors and much of the space, there's still a lot of proprietary work being done, and it is not easy for a utility to make investments with certainty that the standards are going to be intact.
Right. Gil,
I actually don't have an answer. But the way I think about it is, if I'm a tech company, I would try and work the regulators and help the regulators catch up with the transformation that's going on, and help educating that environment. Because I think innovation will happen under the right environment, and many tech companies will benefit from that. But I don't have like that single product or service that I would sell to a utility. I think that's going to happen naturally under the right environment.
Rod, any thoughts from you on that?
No, customers are going to expect, if they don't already, uninterrupted service across the board. And if I am a tech company that has the potential to move the industry in that direction, then all the other ancillary players in the marketplace are going to benefit from it. But that's the key in terms of dealing where I think the customer point of view is going, uninterrupted service.
So I could ask, we didn't even touch on like sort of the regulatory component. We didn't even touch on like power generation and what's happening around that. There's so many massive areas that are yet to be explored that I know the conference has been talking about today. We are actually officially out of time. Gentlemen, it has been a pleasure and a privilege to be on stage with y'all. I've enjoyed this conversation very much. Thank you so much, and thank you to y'all for listening and placing some great questions.
I enjoyed it. That's right.